Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling, award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, listeners and viewers, coast to coast, the Gulf to the 51st state, and I am laughing because part of this show tells you, once again, your cowboy, he was ahead of the power curve on this. Boy, you're going to find this interesting. And around the globe, this is Reed Lance Rosenthal, the Cowboys' take on video channels everywhere and on all sorts of stations and audio and podcasts everywhere also. And that is On the Right Side Radio. So, this show, I was going to bring you a show on violence by the left. Historically, how has the left, how have communists used violence to overthrow governments and, shall we say, have their way with the country? That is going to be the next show, because there are some economic developments which are monumental that nobody, or virtually nobody, is covering. You probably may have heard of them in passing, but I doubt it. But you need to know about them, because they will affect you. They are affecting you. So this show is going to be about what's happening in Japan with what's called the carry trade. And it's going to be about what's happening in Canada, which the mainstream media everywhere is trying to keep really hush-hush. But you know what? We just might have the 51st and 52nd state here over the next 12 months. Yeah, you bet. And what a plus it would be for America. What a deserved slap in the face would be to the totalitarian, ever more totalitarian government of Canada. And congratulations to the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta. And I have all sorts of videos. The publishers have done a great job, and you really should watch them. I mean, it is astounding. And it's right along the lines of the show that I brought to you about a year ago, telling you that Canada, I mean, I was the very first. Canada is not a country. It is a federation of provinces which are really, under the Canadian Charter and the original King's Grant, complete, individual, and separate countries. All they have to do is stand up and declare their sovereignty and act under it. And guess what? It's underway, and it's underway seriously. This is not like people talking about it. I mean, the tanks are moving. I don't mean that there's violence. I mean that there is traction, big traction. Okay, and I'm going to bring to you another really big deal, and that's what's happening in Ukraine. Because, gee, none of the Western press is talking about that either. Isn't that amazing? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Venezuela, because crickets by the press, other than in Russia and in China, and a little bit in Venezuela. And I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of rat-a-tat-tat today. Just some real key kind of economic numbers that literally just came out. First of all, I want to apologize. It's been a week since the last show. It might even be 8 or 9 days. But it has been busy here on the ranch, and which really brings us into the ranch story, which I'll get to in just a moment. You'll kind of chuckle. And it brings us into a quote. And over the last 3 shows, I've brought you the reality of money. I've told you about liquidity. I've told you about the central bank. I've told you about all sorts of things which affect your pocketbook, your security, your property, and perhaps your freedoms. If you have not listened to those shows, may I suggest you do as you have time, and that you pass them out to anybody and everybody who needs to hear them. And there's a lot of people who need to hear this, like everyone. But some of the things that I was warning about in those shows are coming to fruition faster than anybody, including yours truly, envisioned. So back to my apologies for this being the first show in about 8 days. I've been very, very busy on the ranch. I mean, hugely busy on the ranch. We have all the winter stuff done now. I mean, there's a couple of stakes to put in on the road. There's one machine to haul undercover because there's an electrical problem. We can't get it started. There's 3 more bales. That's it. Out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. 3 more bales to stack for the winter stack, and we're all set there. And 1 more load to pick up by a hay buyer, and then the haystack is done. And then the last thing we have to do is put the big fences that are in sections, panels, around the winter haystack so that the elk and the deer can't get in there. And we have the winter cows coming in on Monday, so that's good. So we're set. It's been unseasonably warm. I mean, really, incredibly beautiful weather. More like early September than, end of November. That's about to change, they say, in a week or so. We shall see. I hope it does, because we really don't want to be this dry over the winter. It's good. That'll make for an ugly summer next year. And then my ranch hand, who's only been here 2 months, his last day, and rather abruptly, I might add, was about 3 days ago. I had just had it, and I had learned some things that really distressed me. I have 0 tolerance for alcohol. I mean, I don't care about somebody who takes the occasional social drink, but I have 0 tolerance for, should we say, misuse or overuse of alcohol. And I have 0 tolerance for drugs. And I have 0 tolerance for people who are hooked on medications, which is just another form of drug addiction. And over the last several weeks, I kind of discovered all 3 things. And those 3 things also, shall we say, influenced bad decision-making on his part in terms of some things to do with the ranch. So I believe it was Thursday. Might have been Wednesday, in the middle of all this frantic work on the ranch. In fact, you'll notice I still have ranch clothes on. I finally came in to get this show done. Otherwise, it would have been done for another 5 days. So you have to excuse me for not dressing up. I did put on my show hat, so I'm kind of all dressed up for you. Anyway, I made a decision about 11 o'clock, and he was out of here by 3. It was that fast. And as luck would have it, out of the blue, boy, you can't ask for better things, a ranch hand who used to work for us and was great, his gig was up wherever he was, and he said he would be happy to come back at least until March. And I have some great folks lined up for March, which I had been working on for a while. Anyway, so, everything kind of fell into place. The front part of it fell out of place rather abruptly. It was great. It was like, I'll stand here and I'll watch you pack. How's that? Okay. So that's the ranch story. Just more stuff on the ranch. And of course, the Yellowstone drama drags on here on the ranch. But nope, not going to tell you any more about it yet. That'll be later. And this show, the last 3 shows and this show, brings me to the quote we're going to use today. And this is by Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's one of his most famous quotes, and he has a bunch of great ones. He and his partner, Charlie Munger, I have one of those for you next week. So, the first rule of business is to never lose money. And the second rule of business is to never forget the first rule. I want you to think about that for just a moment. And you can interplay those words, folks, based on the last 3 shows I've brought you and this one. You can interplay money, never lose money, with never forfeit security. You can interplay never sacrifice safety. You can interplay never don't plan for the plannable and the unplannable. Any one of those things are rules to live your life by, particularly in the current times, which are highly, highly, highly unstable, domestically internationally, economically, and in terms of currencies and money systems across the planet. There are many countries struggling, and that includes China, in a different way than the United States, but with some of the same ingredients: huge high debt, which you probably didn't know about, injections of cash into the economy, trying to stop what they have over there is deflation for a whole bunch of reasons. And of course, in the United States, you have the specter of inflation. In fact, you have inflation, never mind the specter. And you have wild, 130% debt to GDP ratios and all sorts of other startling and scary statistics. But one of the things which can happen here is that either a black swan, an event, that kind of, if you really sat down, thought about it, you could have imagined, but an event that you basically can't imagine happens, or a false flag. In other words, somebody does something intentionally to start cratering the system, or to start making you think that somebody else did something intentionally to start cratering the system in the event of a false flag. And then you have the red herrings. Lots of people like to use red herrings. You're talking to them about subject A or B or C, and all of a sudden, wow, spaghetti starts flying to the wall, and they're off to subjects X, Y, and Z. And that's a red herring designed to distract you from what's really going on. In any event, let me bring you up to speed here on some huge developments literally over the last 5 or 6 days that will affect global finance, global economies, global financial structures if they play out the way they are currently starting to play out. First of all, in the metals markets and the commodities markets, the LBMA, we talked about that in the last 3 shows, who for hundreds of years have been the go-to and set the price of metals, gold, silver, platinum, copper, you name it. And the COMEX, a close number 2 in New York, the LBMA is in London, and the COMEX, and they're having all sorts of difficulties getting together enough product to deliver, because everybody all of a sudden doesn't want to just sell their paper contracts in these futures markets and take dollars or take payment, even if it's profitable. Everybody is all of a sudden saying, no, deliver me the metal, deliver me the commodity. And guess what? These outfits trade 200 times more paper than they have available commodities. This could be a huge wreck. I mean, the LBMA could shut down over this. COMEX has a better reserve. They can better honor what's called call contracts. But they are woefully short in terms of the total contracts that are outstanding and the amount of commodities that they have to deliver if the holder of a contract says, I don't want money, I want the stuff, and I want it now, which is their right to do as a contract holder, I might add. So we're going to have to keep a very close eye on that, because that could trigger all sorts of systemic problems. In Japan is the number 1 in the world worst debt to GDP ratio. Depending upon who you talk to, 230% to 250% debt to GDP. They owe 250%, give or take, more in debt than their GDP can produce in a like time frame for the duration of the debt. 30 years, 10 years, 1 year, doesn't matter. The ratios are all the same. And the reason for this is that Japan, for decades, has followed a policy of high liquidity. We talked about in the last 3 shows, so If you don't know what liquidity is, the amount of currency, whether it's Japanese yen or it's American dollars or it's British pounds or it's Russian rubles, that are flopping around in that economy. And the more you have of them, the less each is worth, which is inflation. Japan has kept high liquidity, and they've kept very low interest rates. Although the rest of the world raised interest rates after the COVID nonsense, Japan did not. And they didn't after 2008, the great financial crisis, or the dot-com bust in 2000. Basically, they've pursued a almost 0% interest rate policy for 3 decades, give or take a year or two. And that means that money, you could go borrow Japanese yen from a Japanese bank or a currency dealer or whoever, and you could borrow it at basically 0%. And the carry trade is when you took that borrowing in 0% interest yen and you went out and bought something else with it that would make you more. For instance, U.S. Treasuries, paying 3% or 4% or 4.5%, depending upon when you bought them, or you name it. And because of this carry trade, Japan has about $20 trillion. Think about this, $20 trillion. Almost the GDP of the United States. Almost the GDP of China. I mean, it's huge amount of money that's out on carry trades, where people are borrowing for nothing in Japan and using that money to buy something that pays more somewhere else, and getting what's called the arbitrage, the spread, the profit. Well, all of a sudden, Japan is in such dire straits that over the last 2 weeks, interest rates have spiked, particularly for Japan, because remember, you're coming off a 0% base. And that's what everybody's been used to, with almost no exceptions. There's been 1 or 2 little blips in it over the last 30 years. And now, suddenly, because of their debt to GDP ratio, because their Japanese bondholders are going, whoa, wait a minute. The government has had to step in and buy its own bonds. Jesus, does that sound familiar? And interest rates have gone through, for the Japanese, the pagoda ceiling. In fact, they are about 3.9% right now. They came down slightly on Friday. But think about going from 0 to 3.9% like that. And think about what that does to people being able to get money out of Japan to put in other things like, buying U.S. Treasuries to finance the United States debt. And I'm just using that as an example. You can put in 50 other countries in that sentence. So there could be a huge unraveling of this 20 trillion that's out in the carry trade. And there could be a huge unraveling, since the carry trade at 3.9% for the Japanese yen, it doesn't work. There is no arbitrage. In fact, there's very few things out there which are solid and liquid. In other words, you can convert them to cash at a moment's notice, that are going to bring you 3.9%. In other words, a Japanese carry trade right now is going to lose you money. So who's going to do it? And if you don't do it, you don't have the money to buy U.S. Treasuries or, the British Guilder or whatever. This is a really big deal for the world. And we're going to have to see how it resolves. But it could resolve in $20 trillion problem. And the world cannot sustain a $20 trillion problem right now. Never mind each individual country and their reliance over the last 30 years on somebody doing a Japanese carry trade and buying a United States Treasury bond or a Deutsche Bank bond from Germany or whatever. That's number one. Number two, in Ukraine, the line of conflict, that is the front lines between Russia and Ukraine, are collapsing. And they're not collapsing against Russia, they are collapsing against Ukraine. There is now close to 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers trapped in two major enclaves, two major cities that the Russians have surrounded. And there's countless smaller pockets, 500 men here, 1,000 here, 2,000 here, 50,000 soldiers. This is in an army that has had to put 18-year-olds and 60-year-olds in the army, sweep them off the streets with secret police, put a uniform on them, and send them to the front. And Russia is about done destroying their electrical and their power grid. And winter's coming on. And you have the morons in Europe. Make sure you listen to my show about the demise of the European Union. In fact, there's a video. I really urge you to take a look at the videos which are on the show on the rightsideradio.com. They're all categorized: rat-a-tat-tat, which is kind of what I would talk about today; under the audio bar for the really key ones; international for all this stuff I'm bringing you right now. This is much more detail by really knowledgeable experts, and you will be apprised, and you need to be apprised of what's going on here. Then you have Canada. Now, Canada, folks, is this is really a good news story. Canada's been getting more and more totalitarian. I brought you a story last week or the week before, whatever show it was. I mean, listen to them. About Canada now trying to outlaw any gun really over the level of a BB gun in Canada. I mean, they outlawed pistols, I think, 3 or 4 years ago under Trudeau. And now you have Carney. And Carney is just Trudeau, better spoken, smarter, and more tied into the globalist society. And Ottawa, the capital of Canada, has been ignoring provinces of Canada, particularly Alberta, which is the energy backbone of Canada, Saskatchewan, which is the agricultural backbone of Canada, British Columbia, which is the shipping backbone of Canada, and Quebec for years. In fact, Canada has been extracting between $50 billion US dollars, 50 billion US dollar equivalents, and $75 billion equivalents each year from each of those 4 provinces, bringing it back to Ottawa, and God only knows what corruption has occurred, but using it to buy votes with their social BS, Bolshevik, totalitarian programs. I told you on this gun grab, this confiscation that they are going on, it's going to be somewhere between $3 and $4 billion cost to the Canadian government to try and collect all these guns in Canada. And that money came from the provinces from which they want to collect the guns. Think about that. If you go back into the archives, I did a show along with a video which has all the legalese, all the documents. I mean, it's really a fascinating video that shows that the provinces in Canada are not provinces, that Canada is not a quote-unquote country, nothing like the United States. Canada is a federation of independent provinces who, in fact, are autonomous countries in and of themselves. That's under the Canadian Charter / Constitution. And I brought all this 2 years ago, and I said, somebody is going to pick up on this, and somebody's going to run with this football. And boy, they're running with the football now. And not only that, they're only about 10 yards from the goal line. Brilliant legal work, brilliant political work, and brilliant work in that it's all under the Canadian quote-unquote Constitution / Charter, and under the original grant from the Queen of England. The bottom line is that Alberta has pretty much declared its independence from Canada. And Saskatchewan is right on its heels. And the two have formed what's called the Prairie Economic Alliance. And they have told Ottawa, we're no longer bound by your regulations. We will do our own regulations. We're no longer going to pay you a carbon tax. We're no longer going to pay you an excise tax. We're no longer going to let you block our oil pipelines and drilling or our harvest in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan supplies 60% of the potash to the entire world, and Ottawa takes all the money. And British Columbia is like moving in that direction also. And the Yukon now wants to be part of the action. You're going to see a really major transformation in Canada over the next 6 to 16, 18 months. And Alberta has already sent envoys to Washington, as has Saskatchewan. And Washington has already told them they will recognize them as sovereign countries, or they will work to bring them in as states, if that's what the provinces would rather be than sovereign countries. And in any event, there will be no tariffs. There will be no restriction on trade. There will be mutual cooperation on border security, illegal immigration, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, folks, this is happening. I urge you to watch these videos. This is really a big deal. Like, this is a big deal. And whether or not they are simply autonomous countries that are great trading partners with the United States or the 51st and 52nd state, this is a huge, great deal for the United States. And you got to think about Trump doing the needle of the 51st state way back when and kind of setting this ball in motion. And everybody said, oh, you're just pissing off our best neighbor and all this kind of stuff. Well, you know what? Actually, it got some light bulbs flickering up there in those provinces. And I really think, probably not all, but in large part, it was his flick of the lighter that got this independent fire raging. And it's raging. And it's legal and it's peaceful. Both of these provinces are going to have a referendum. They only need 250,000 signatures to put it on the ballot. They already have them. The referendum isn't scheduled and they have enough signatures for the ballot. It's estimated that 60 to 68% of the population of the two provinces fully back independence from Ottawa, and a slightly smaller percentage statehood with the United States, a larger percentage a great partnership with the United States. So this is a really big deal, okay? I mean, this could really be a big deal for the United States and for Canada and for these provinces. And go Alberta, go. Go Saskatchewan, go. Good for you. Good for you. All right. And then, of course, we have Mexico. You may not have heard that hundreds of thousands are in the streets of major Mexican cities, that tens upon tens of thousands of people tried to storm. They've stormed police stations. There's all sorts of videos on the web. Beat up police, with police yelling and screaming that we're with you, we're with you. They tried to storm the presidential palace. They're demanding the ouster of the government. They're tired of the narco stuff. They're tired of the cartel corruption. They're tired of the lack of safety. And they're tired of the Mexican economy, which has been stumbling along. Under the current government, also trying to limit, the extraction of minerals. The same thing really kind of the Canadian government was trying to do. We're going to keep our eye on Mexico because we have both neighbors, north and south, in an uproar right now. And obviously, when you have your neighbors on either side of you in an uproar, it affects you too. Now let's talk a little bit more about Ukraine. Russia is now doing a major buildup. I mean, they're kicking Ukraine's butt. They're now doing major buildup for pretty much the final push, which would probably be to Odessa, which is literally Ukraine's only remaining port, which would turn Ukraine into a landlocked rump state. And of course, the morons at the European Union, which is fracturing by the day, are beating the war drums and warning Russia. I mean, this is kind of like a 6-year-old who's 3 feet tall, wagging his finger at Goliath, saying, "You better not do that or I'll kick you in the shin." I mean, splat. Hopefully, Trump has made it clear to Zelensky, the crook, and the European Union, the morons, that they can do whatever the hell they want, but we ain't doing it with them. Good luck, good riddance, have at it. Because that's what the United States needs to do. In Venezuela, Russia has moved 2 Russian Navy destroyers, into the waters between our fleet and the Venezuelan coast. Russia has business interests in Venezuela, as does China. And it sets up another point of conflict between 2 nuclear superpowers. You know, what happens if we launch a strike of whatever type, and I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. We launch a strike of whatever type on the Venezuelan mainland, and the Russian destroyers decide to defend. And somebody in those Russian destroyers decides to send an anti-ship missile toward our carrier. I mean, once again, we have another powder keg going on. All of it centered around what's happening in the world, folks. And we've talked about this ad nauseum in these shows. And I was the first one to bring you the concept that I think behind the scenes, even though there's a lot of sparring going on, there's already been pretty much a decision made or a decision acknowledged that the United States gets the Western Hemisphere. Russia gets Eurasia, the Russian steppes, whatever. And China gets Asia. And those are the 3 spheres of influence in a multipolar world. And everything that's going on, China building up its forces in Taiwan, and America finally enforcing, after 100 years of neglect, the Monroe Doctrine here in the Western Hemisphere, the fracturing of Canada. Everything kind of points to my projection to you of less than a year ago that this is what's going on. And look, here's the point I'm trying to make. Go back to Warren Buffett's quote today. Use the words I interjected. Money, security, safety, right? You need to be prepared. I hope you listen to my Money is Reality shows, particularly the last one where I went over what a lot of people are doing to, as best they can, protect themselves from what is likely coming. Likely. Nothing is guaranteed. But you know, 2 + 2 is 4, and you can't beat the math. A quick little rat-a-tat-tat for you. The South African, their major transgender medical clinic, was abruptly shut down last week when Senate or House, I'm not sure which, investigators found there was 550 billion. That's 550 million. Just millions, guys. Yeah, no, don't worry about it. It's like pocket change. And corruption and bribes by the Biden administration through, yes, USAID. You know, that the Democrats want to keep alive and fund. That was funding this trans medical clinic in friggin' South Africa. Yeah, that's a great use of your money and my money, isn't it? It's as bad as the money being shipped by the provinces to Ottawa so Ottawa can be financed enough to come take their guns. It's unbelievable. So that got shut down. Yay. Next little tidbit, consumer confidence. Now think about how the American economy works. I mean, Trump is working his butt off to try and change it, get it more back to manufacturing, reshore manufacturing, get us to be more of a production than a consumption nation. But right now, 70% of the American economy is consumer driven, it's consumption driven, okay? And everybody else makes all the stuff that gets consumed. And people don't buy if they don't have confidence. People don't buy in uncertain times, when they are uncertain, when outcomes are uncertain. I mean, you know that from your own personal existence. You're less likely to buy a car or buy a washing machine or buy the new couch or whatever if you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And there's a consumer confidence survey that's done. We didn't get it in October because the government was shut down. Unfortunately, it reopened. That's just me talking. But now that it's reopened, our consumer confidence survey came out on Friday. It dropped 7.5 points to 51.1. That means that 51.1% of the population of the United States is relatively confident, which also means 49.9% are not. Half the country is not confident enough to write a check to buy anything. And the figure is growing. 7.5% a month is a huge change, not a little change, a huge change. It's a 48-year low. 48 years, folks. I mean, that brings you back to the mid-70s, and we all know what the mess that was. So if you have 50% of an economy not buying, and the economy is 70% how much people buy, well, you know, you can kind of put that thought sequence together for yourself. And then if you couple it with the things I've brought you today, and you couple it with the last little rat-a-tat-tat I'm going to give you, the repo market. I've talked about the repo market. I talked about it in the last 3 shows. I mean, it's part of the reality of money today. The repo market is the repo system is something that the Federal Reserve set up just 5 or 6 years ago because banks didn't have money. They didn't have liquidity. And so the Fed set up the repo market where you could take your treasury bond that you were holding as a bank because it's gone down in value, because rates have gone up, or whatever the reason is. And you didn't have to sell that at a loss. Instead, you could use it at face value, never mind the fact it was worth less, to borrow on a very short-term basis. This can be overnight even, from the repo fund to take care of your immediate liquidity needs. The repo market is down to almost zero reserves. The use of the repo market is at its highest level. In fact, it's spiked over the last several weeks in somewhere around 10 to 20 years, going back to the great financial crisis. There's been virtually no spikes, and no spikes of any significance, for a very long time. Now it's spiking. Now it's depleted. And the Federal Reserve called a secret, they thought, the word got out, very hasty meeting with them and the 25, shall we say, systemic banks. You know, JP Morgan and UBS and Citicorp. A secret meeting to discuss this very problem. And probably to tell these banks they might have to step up and help with the repo emerging problem. I mean, I don't know what was discussed. Nobody seems to know. In fact, nobody even knew about this secret meeting, which was held last week, and which I guess they figured nobody would find out about. Really? In today's day and age? But the fact that the Fed is calling immediate secret meetings of the 25 largest banks at the time that all this other stuff is happening, it ought to be sending a red flag up your mental flagpole, folks. All right, the next show, and now that we're kind of under control on the ranch here again, kind of, never completely under control because things change like that. I'm going to try and have that out next 3 or 4 days, famous last words, and that is going to be on the history of left-wing communist violence in bringing down governments over the last several hundred years around the world. And I'm going to tie it into the steps that they are undertaking right now, violent steps. It's the same playbook, folks. It's the same Karl Marx playbook. It's the same Saul Alinsky Handbook for Radicals playbook that they are invoking and evoking and embarking on at the current time. And I'm going to tie all that together for you, and that they're embarking on. Because since we have history as our guide, even more so after you listen to the next show, I think it behooves all of us to keep our eyes and ears open and to prevent and defend against the violence which is being purposely instigated as part of a much bigger plan. This isn't just Antifa showing up at a turning point get-together. This isn't just, a group showing up at an ICE facility. This is way more. This is totally coordinated. And there's some people that should be brought to trial for treason and sedition. And we can go from there. But I think you'll find the show fascinating, and I think it'll... Let me just say some lights will blink for you. It'll tie things together which so far you've only seen scattered, the scattered headline here and there. It's all part of a much bigger picture. It's all part of a plan. It's been done before in hundreds of places around the globe. And they're trying to do it here right now, taking advantage of the chaos here and the chaos internationally, some of which we talked about today. If I don't, by some chance, speak to you before Thanksgiving, which is now, just 4 days away, you have absolutely the greatest Thanksgiving ever. Enjoy your family and friends. Think about these shows. Pass them on. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell so you know when they come out, since we don't have a set schedule. And get yourself prepared, folks. Daylight's wasting, as John Wayne said. Daylight's wasting. All right, this is Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take. You keep the wind at your back. We'll talk to you shortly.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.